watching XNN, exclusive news network. Stay informed, stay grounded. Something significant is happening in the Middle East, and it goes far deeper than the headlines. When a military force fires over 100 ballistic missiles and more than 200 drones in a single day, targeting airports, naval installations, and cities across multiple countries simultaneously, the world pays attention. But the real question isn't just what is happening, it's why. And more importantly, what kind of military thinking is driving those decisions? What strategy sits behind that level of force? Tonight we take a careful, factual look at one of the most complex military doctrines in the modern world, Iran's armed strategy, and how it has fundamentally shifted since a 12-day conflict that shook the entire region less than a year ago. This story is not about fear, it is about facts, and the facts are remarkable. To understand where Iran stands militarily today, we have to understand what changed and when. In June of 2025, Israel launched a series of airstrikes targeting Iranian military and nuclear sites. Scientists and military commanders were killed. The conflict escalated rapidly. Iran retaliated with hundreds of ballistic missiles aimed at Israeli cities. For 12 days, missiles flew in both directions. Casualties mounted. Some of Iran's projectiles breached Israel's Iron Dome, the missile defense system long considered among the most effective in the world. Then, on June 22nd, 2025, the United States entered the conflict directly, deploying bunker-buster munitions against Iran's nuclear facilities at Natanz, Fordow and Isfahan. Days later, a fragile ceasefire was brokered. It was not a resolution, it was a pause. That pause ended, and the world is now watching the consequences unfold in real time. According to reports and defense analysts speaking publicly on the matter, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed following a coordinated US-Israeli strike on Tehran. Iranian state media confirmed his death. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, immediately vowed revenge and announced what it described as the heaviest offensive operations in the history of the Islamic Republic's armed forces. Iran's army chief also pledged to continue defending the country. Iranian fighter jets reportedly bombed US military bases across the Gulf region, and the strikes did not stop there. Reports confirmed that Iran fired 137 missiles and 209 drones, targeting the United Arab Emirates, where US military installations are located. Fires were reported near Dubai's iconic Palm Jumeirah and Burj Al Arab at Abu Dhabi's international airport. And at least one person was killed and 7 were wounded. Dubai's airport, the world's busiest for international air traffic, was struck. Kuwait's airport was also hit. In Israel, a missile strike on the town of Beit Shemesh killed at least 9 people and wounded more than 20. Explosions were also reported across Qatar and Bahrain. It was an extraordinary and wide-ranging escalation. To fully understand what Iran is doing and why, it helps to understand how its military is actually structured, because it is unlike almost any other armed force in the world. Iran does not operate a single unified army, it operates parallel armies. The first is the Artesh, Iran's conventional military force responsible for territorial defense, airspace protection, and standard military operations. The second is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, a force whose mandate goes well beyond traditional defense. The IRGC exists to protect Iran's political structure itself. It controls Iran's airspace and its drone arsenal, which has become, according to defense specialists, the backbone of Iran's deterrence capability. Layered on top of these parallel armies are multiple intelligence services and complex command structures, all of which answer directly to the supreme leader, who serves as commander-in-chief of all armed forces. Defense analysts have told reporters that this deliberate complexity is a strategic choice designed to protect the country not only from external attack but from internal threats. including the possibility of a military coup. One military specialist and former military official, speaking on condition of anonymity, explained it clearly. Iran's military strategy, they said, is derived from its political structure. And the primary aim is to safeguard territorial integrity and prevent foreign intervention designed to overthrow the government. Every military decision flows from that central objective. So what exactly is Iran doing now, and why does it look so different from what happened during last year's 12-day war? Defence analysts are describing Iran's current military strategy in clear terms. John Phillips, a British security and risk advisor and former military chief instructor, provided a detailed breakdown of how Tehran is now operating. The first layer of the strategy is what analysts call asymmetric endurance. Iran is hardening what are known as missile cities, underground defensive infrastructure designed to protect ballistic and cruise missiles from aerial attack. Command structures are being dispersed across multiple locations, and Iran is deliberately accepting initial damage to preserve what is called a second strike capability, the ability to retaliate even after absorbing a significant blow. Rather than trying to prevent all incoming strikes, Iran is calculating that surviving them and striking back is the more viable path. The second layer involves regional saturation and proxy warfare. Iran is launching large salvos of ballistic missiles and loitering munitions, slow-flying drones capable of circling a target and then striking. Alongside these direct attacks, Iran is activating partner militias and Hezbollah across the region. The goal, analysts say, is to stretch Israeli and American missile defense systems to their limits. Forcing those systems to intercept hundreds of projectiles simultaneously means some will inevitably get through, and it imposes significant costs in ammunition, logistics and resources on the other side. Reports confirmed that early on March 2nd, Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets into northern Israel, specifically, officials noted, in response to the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei. And the third layer of the strategy involves the Strait of Hormuz, arguably the most economically significant maritime choke point in the world. Approximately 20 to 30% of the world's oil and gas supplies pass through that narrow waterway. Iran has threatened to close it. As of the time of reporting, no official closure had taken place. However, shipping data showed that at least 150 tankers, including crude oil and liquefied natural gas vessels, had dropped anchor in open Gulf waters beyond the strait, effectively halted in anticipation of a possible blockade. That kind of disruption sends a signal not just to the United States and Israel, but to governments and economies across the globe. Now, here is the critical question. How is this strategy different from what Iran did during the 12-day war last June? So, according to Phillips, the shift is fundamental. During last year's conflict, Iran's approach was still rooted in a primarily defensive, containment-focused doctrine. It used proxies extensively and attempted to avoid full direct engagement. The June 2025 war, Phillips said, marked a major turning point, a shift from largely proxy-based confrontation to direct, high-intensity exchanges between Iran and Israel with US military involvement. Since then, Tehran has formally moved toward what analysts describe as an offensive asymmetric posture. Iran now embraces earlier and more extensive use of regional missile volleys, drone attacks, cyber attacks, and what is called energy coercion, the deliberate targeting or disruption of energy infrastructure and resources to impose costs on opponents. Critically, though, Phillips noted that while Iran's doctrine has become more aggressive, and its actual operational capabilities have been constrained by the damage it suffered during last year's conflict, by ongoing economic sanctions and by internal political instability following the deaths of senior leadership figures. Compared to June 2025, analysts explained, Iran today appears more risk-accepting and escalatory in its calculations, but its degraded capabilities and fear of triggering a regime-ending response push it toward calibrated, episodic bursts of aggression rather than sustained full-scale war. The comparison drawn by analysts is instructive. In January 2020, after the killing of IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani in a US airstrike near Baghdad's international airport, Iran responded by firing more than a dozen missiles at Iraqi bases hosting American forces. There were no casualties. The strike was measured a demonstration of resolve rather than an attempt to cause maximum damage. One analysts believe a similar logic is likely at play in the current escalation, alongside larger retaliatory strikes designed to demonstrate that Iran can still project meaningful military force. This matters far beyond the Middle East, and that is not an exaggeration. It is simply what the evidence shows. The Strait of Hormuz disruption alone has already sent oil prices rising sharply, according to reports. Supply chains and energy markets globally are watching the situation with deep concern. The world's busiest international airport was struck by Iranian munitions. Debris from intercepted missiles has fallen on civilian areas across multiple countries. The scale of the current exchange is significant by any historical measure. Featherstone, an associate lecturer in politics at the University of York, told reporters that for the United States and Israel, international condemnation and domestic political opposition represent meaningful limiting factors. And Trump ran his campaign on being a president focused on domestic priorities, yet has become increasingly aggressive in military operations abroad, a tension that observers say cannot be maintained indefinitely. For Iran, the political and economic pressures are even more acute. While Iran can sustain missile, drone, proxy and cyber attacks for an extended period due to the relatively low cost of those systems and the dispersal of its production capabilities, analysts warn that prolonged, high-intensity conflict risks severe economic contraction, internal civil unrest and a further erosion of government legitimacy among Iran's own population. As of the reporting of this story, the conflict between Iran, Israel and United States military assets remains active and ongoing. Iranian officials have continued to vow retaliation following the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei, and Iran's parliamentary speaker publicly warned the United States and Israel that they had, in his words, crossed a red line and would pay a price. On the American side, President Trump told one major outlet that the conflict could last 4 to 5 weeks. In a separate interview, he indicated that after Khamenei's killing, the United States was not focused on targeting further Iranian leadership. And in a third statement, this time to a major magazine, Trump said Iran's new leadership had agreed to talk to him, suggesting the possibility of some form of diplomatic opening. The signals are contradictory. The situation remains fluid. For those seeking to understand the deeper architecture of what is happening, the picture that emerges from analyst assessments is of a conflict that both sides have incentives to escalate and strong reasons to eventually pause. Iran's strategy, as described by Phillips, is that of a wounded animal, still capable of striking with significant force, still able to impose real costs on its adversaries, but aware that a sustained, unlimited exchange could end the regime itself. Tehran is therefore likely to pursue what analysts call calibrated episodic escalation, intense bursts of military activity followed by tacit pauses rather than continuous maximum intensity warfare. The United States, with its global force projection capabilities, enormous industrial base and extensive military assets, can sustain the current operational tempo far longer than either regional actor in purely material terms. But analysts say the binding constraint for Washington is not military. It is political. Domestic appetite for another open-ended Middle Eastern conflict is limited. Public support for sustained foreign military engagement is not guaranteed. And the alignment between US military strategy and political will is, analysts say, the variable that will ultimately shape how long and how intensely this conflict continues. Israel, meanwhile, retains qualitative air superiority and a robust missile defense network supported by US assets, but reserve mobilization fatigue, civilian disruption, and growing international diplomatic pressure represent real constraints on how long any government can sustain that kind of campaign, even one with strong military capabilities. What happens next depends on a complex web of military capability, political will, economic pressure, and critically, who takes power in Tehran following Khamenei's death, and what signals that new leadership chooses to send to the United States and the international community. That is where this story stands right now. A conflict that formally resumed on March 1st, 2026 is entering its third day with no confirmed ceasefire, no formal diplomatic channel, and significant military operations ongoing across multiple countries and bodies of water. Defence analysts are watching carefully. Governments around the world are responding to rising oil prices, disrupted air travel, and the uncertainty of a conflict involving three of the world's most militarily consequential actors. If you found this reporting useful, we encourage you to share it with others who want to understand what is happening, not just what to feel about it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read them. Respectful, fact-based discussion is always welcome here at XNN. And if you want to stay updated as this situation develops, following this channel is the best way to do that. And we will continue covering this story with the same factual, grounded approach you just heard. The question we leave you with tonight is this. Given that analysts say Iran's strategy depends on episodic escalation rather than sustained full-scale war, and given that the United States appears to be looking for an off-ramp, what would a ceasefire actually need to look like for both sides to accept it? And is that even possible now, after the killing of a supreme leader? This has been XNN, E-Exclusive News Network. Stay informed, stay grounded.